Good afternoon. My name is Joe McGowan, and I bring you greetings from the Southern California Nevada Conference of the United Church of Christ. And we're reminded here today that an installation of a new pastor is just not an act of a local church, it is the act of the whole church. So I bring you greetings from the conference that nurtured Kelli for most of her life. She was connected first through our Southern Association. She was a member of our church in Pacific Beach that nurtured her throughout her childhood and her youth and her early adult life, and is where she realized she had a call to God's ministry. It was at our Mission Hills Church and the Southern Association where she did her internship and cut her teeth on ministry and got to realize the gifts that God had placed in her to do ministry. She had a very admirable 10-year time as a hospice chaplain. And as someone who's been a hospice chaplain now going on 22 years, I can tell you it is not easy work. It drains you emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and you've got to walk with God in order to be with dying and death all of the time. And she did that so wonderfully. And we would commiserate together about that shared ministry, even though we did it in different settings. But how do I know Pastor Kelli? We were colleagues together in Altadena, California, in the Central Association of our conference for my last 5 years of congregational ministry before I took retirement. Kelli then stayed on another 9 months serving that congregation during part of their interim period until she accepted the call here to the First Congregational Church of Rock Springs. And as you've already learned from Sue, the conference minister, she's been here for quite a while. But as you know, with COVID, all of these kinds of celebrations of life have been backlogged. There's so many people waiting for events like this. And so what a joy that here today we could finally do this installation of your new pastor and teacher. As your conference minister, Sue, began reminding us of this time in which we live that is unlike any other time in our lives. You and I have lived through perhaps what it will be known as the greatest challenge of the last 100 years. It's been 20 months, in case you've been counting, in which we have dealt with this unknown foe, scientifically called the novel coronavirus, better known to us as COVID-19. The ways that our lives have been turned upside down and permanently altered won't be known for years to come. The toll that this collective grief has taken on our psyches won't ease for years. The recovery of our economy and the return to our ways of life are just beginning to ease now. Those are the negatives. I have found some positives in this pandemic, and I want to share some of what I think are those positives today. First and foremost, we are now blessed and surrounded with technologies that keep us connected the ways that no other past generation could ever have imagined. And we think our isolation is bad. Think of what it would have been like without these virtual technologies. There is a whole Pastor Kelli fan club that you can't see today who are here with us. They have gathered with us on Zoom and on Facebook, and so I welcome those friends and family of Pastor Kelli to this great celebration on her installation day. And just think how many of you have had that delight, say, of seeing your grandchild's face on a screen when you couldn't hug them in person. And think of what you as a congregation were able to do these past 20 months. In worshiping together, you never missed a Sunday. Whether it was joining virtually with the Green River Sister Church just down the road, or when Pastor Kelli and Ed came here and brought the technologies that you could use so that virtually you could worship together on your own until you opened up the building once again. It's an amazing gift we have. And just think perhaps the gift of connection that has come into your life. If your neighborhood was anything like mine, you lived on streets with people you'd never seen, met, or had connections with. Maybe you would wave to them in passing occasionally, but perhaps you didn't know them, didn't know their life stories and who they are. But this opportunity allowed you to meet some neighbors and to see some people that are right next to you in your own community and make some new friendships, and what a gift that is. Perhaps you use this opportunity to rise to your better self and take care of the vulnerable in your community, the people who could not get out and go to the grocery stores and get their necessities of life out of fear. Maybe you helped that neighbor meet that need and just stopped off with a bag of groceries at their home and gave them that hope and that help. Another gift that we've gotten out of this pandemic time is a whole new set of heroes. Our heroes are no longer in comic books or on the big movie screen. Our heroes live and work among us. Our heroes are those who kept showing up for work day in and day out at our grocery stores and who kept our transportation systems moving. Our heroes are the ones who are even some today working in our hospitals on this Saturday, donning their personal protective equipment, going in and out of each of those hospital rooms, tirelessly combating an unknown and an unseen enemy. And our heroes are the ones who worked around the clock to create these 3 vaccines in record time that allowed you and I to gather here in this sacred space on this day. And what gift has the church received out of COVID-19? Well, as individuals who've gathered today, I think we've learned that inside each one of us is the God-given gift of resiliency. This resiliency is the power to meet the challenges that confront us, and that resiliency gives us the grace that calls us to be our best selves. And what have we learned together as the church? I believe we have learned a lesson that was long overdue. That our church is not the building in which we worship, but the church is the people who gather. For some of our congregations in this country, it was over a year before they ever got back into their facilities to worship together. And yet the church did not miss a beat. We continued to find ways using these virtual platforms to come together and worship and to see each other virtually and to share that joy of fellowship. We found new ways to go out and serve our community and forge new missions that would help meet the needs. This congregation, in the midst of a pandemic, created an amazing food pantry system that's right outside, and if you haven't seen it, I would invite you to look at it before you leave today. One way to make sure that the vulnerable in this community could be fed. Both scripture texts that you have heard this afternoon come from 2 vastly different times in history, but a similar sense of coming out of times of adversity. The words from the prophet Isaiah, which were then picked up by Peter the apostle, give hope to people in times of adversity. The prophecy of Isaiah came to the Israelites in one of their dark times when they were occupied citizens under Babylonian control. Their temple was now a heap of rubble. They lived as a people with no hope until Isaiah delivered God's words of hope to them. Isaiah promised them that the temple would be rebuilt, but it would not be like the old temple. It would now be a place where people would gather to realize that their faith community must be built on justice and righteousness. It must be a place that gives mercy and hope to the world. And in a different time, but also in a time of persecution and struggle, Peter writes his letters of encouragement to the first Christian communities. Peter reminds the church and reminds us today that no matter how challenging the circumstances, we should see ourselves as living stones. Have you ever thought of yourself as a living, breathing stone? Stones do have life, by the way. The church that Peter speaks of is not a church built of blocks and bricks. It is a church built of you and of me. This is what he talks about in this letter. He's encouraging the people who are embracing this new faith, who are bringing Jesus into their life and heart, to see themselves as living stones. We are called upon in that letter to the church to holy living, to a life of justice and righteousness, to give away our hope and mercy to the world. So what can we learn in these past 20 months if the church wants to have a future? I think the key can be found in our scriptures today. That the church needs to stop thinking so much about bricks and blocks and how we're going to maintain these structures and these institutions that we've created, and instead shift our focus back to what we were called on to do from the beginning, to be places of righteousness and justice in the world, to be places of hope and mercy to meet every need in our communities. The church are the living stones of you and of me. We are going into a new world. The world prior to you ever learning a word called COVID-19 will never exist again. We are permanently changed in new ways that we are yet to see. And as we come together for the living and building of these new days, build on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And without that, you cannot build any building that will stand. That's why they talk about the gift of the foundation. If the foundation and the cornerstone aren't laid properly, no building will stand. If we don't have Jesus as our guide, we will not stand. We follow in his footsteps, as Teresa of Avila said, to go out into the world to be his hands and his feet and his heart and his love for a hurting world. That's what living stones do. That is the church that we need to build now. So that brings me to today, to this moment in time, to October 28th, 2021, when you finally get to install your new pastor and teacher. This is just not an exciting weekend for Kelli and Ed. It's an exciting weekend for you in the First Congregational Church of Rock Springs and the member churches of the Intermountain Association and the churches of the Rocky Mountain UCC Conference. It's a new beginning, with the challenges of the pandemic easing and with the gifts of your new pastor and teacher, and with her amazing building skills that she brings. Go build your new church. The needs of your community are many. The world is hurting, and your spirits need renewal. The question I bring to you on this day is, how will you then be these living stones for each other? How will you be the living stones for all who call Sweetwater County home? How will you be the living stones to build the future of the Church of Jesus Christ? Well, I want to share with you some ways you've already begun. Maybe it's a little refresher course for you. You've already learned a lot about virtual worship, as all of these gadgets in front of me attest to. You've learned other alternative ways of gathering, and those might just allow you to carry your good news beyond this address at 1275 Adams Avenue and spread it out into the community and out into the world, and let your good news be heard by all. What have you learned about the hardships suffered during this pandemic that will allow you to give hope and help to all who need it? That amazing food pantry you created is one starting place. What else can you do to help a world that has been turned upside down? We have learned about the importance of connection and community, that what we missed most was that connection and that community, and we found new ways to cling on and be with people. How can we continue to make sure we live with those open hearts so that there's never a time that anyone will ever again have to fear of being in isolation, but will know that there is a true community there to love them and of which they can be part? As this beloved community of the First Congregational Church of Rock Springs, Wyoming, you are now at the threshold of a new beginning. On this Saturday, in which you officially welcome and install Pastor Kelli as your new teacher and pastor, I encourage you to seize the moment of this day and this time. I encourage you to let go of the old days that were pre-pandemic and instead move forward and go forth into this new world of ours, marching into the unknown, but knowing that you march with God by your side. I hope and pray that you will not be forever known as a people occupying a building of blocks and of bricks, but that you will see yourselves as a church built of living, precious stones. Never in your lifetimes have you been given such an opportunity to start anew. If ever the church is needed, this is the time. The world as we once knew it is starting to come back to life, but it will never be what once was. It will be new. And it will be up to each one of you, it will be up to each one of us to shape your world, your church, your community, your life into what you want it to be. What new church will you build now with your building blocks of you and you and you and you? You are the precious living stones that you are. Go build a beautiful church together. Amen.